It is the Two Guys Garage Podcast. He is Kevin Bird. I am Willie B. And today we're talking some cool projects we've had on the show lately. Now, you know, it's crazy because we never really know. To be honest, guys, sometimes we'll go in and we'll hear tell of a cool car coming in, or, you know, hey, a friend of a friend has a car that we're going to work on next. And sometimes we get blindsided by cool projects, and sometimes we get blindsided by bad projects. But lately, they've been great.
I've had some good ones on this season. And, you know, it's a combination of what it is, right? Is it a cool car to begin with?
Right.
And then we've got a very short period of time to knock out an episode. So is it kicking our butt?
Oh.
You know, like, is it just fighting? Is there some rusty bolts or something doesn't fit right? I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
So anything could come at us, right? It's, it's basically reality TV. They're not wanting to show us stressing out.
Yeah.
But damn, if, you know, to catch our plane and get back to the day jobs, we're not hustling to get this project done, and it's just, you know, biting us the whole way.
Yeah,
So
sometimes
we've had some good ones. They've been fun all the way around.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's wild because, you know, through the magic of TV, you're only able to see, you know, 22, 25 minutes of what we're doing, but it's hours and hours and hours and hours during the day, and we are just tackling it. Sometimes on projects that, you know, really get us excited. And for whatever reason, we've had some home runs lately. Like, true to my heart, you see it sitting behind me, a 66 Dodge Charger. Now, don't get it twisted. I have always been a much bigger fan of the second gen Charger than any other Charger. The early ones are hideous. They look terrible. However,
you only have two of them.
Yeah.
Yet they're hideous. So you say. I know you got a secret.
I actually had three of them until one of them got stolen. But that's a podcast for a different day. But I've got several of the second gen Chargers, the Coke style. I've got 6 or 7 of those. So
6 or 7.
I'm a big fan of the Dodge Charger. Now, the car behind me, the 66 wide body I built for SEMA, and the 66 Charger we've had on the show, most people look at those cars and they're lost by them. The lines are this big swooping fastback, as you can tell in this one, you know, and most people get thrown off because it's such a massive swoop that the car never got finished from that roof line. It's called a slapper car, meaning it looks like they just slap sides on it because it's really vertical up and down this way. So when you have a long roof line like this, just to slap sides on it, it looks like the guy that skipped legs, you know, in the gym every day, or never did legs in the gym, you know. So it was a little thrown off compared to the
it's like any artist. If you watch their progression over the years. Right. And they're a famous artist and they make the most amazing stuff. But you go back when they were first starting and you see them trying.
Yeah.
Right. That was like their try. They tried and not quite got all the way.
Yeah.
Right. They came up with this fast back.
Yeah.
You know, this is going to be slick. This is going to be different. And it's like, you got something there, but you need to work it a little bit.
Right. All right. So we had one of these on the show, and it's the traditional, you know, 66 Dodge Charger. He had a 318 in it. They came with a few engine options. Now, this particular build, he wanted to put a 440. Now, you should know this. The 66 Dodge Charger didn't have an option for the 440. Only the 383
That's right.
or the 426 Hemi for the big block offerings. The other was the 318 or the 361. So they shifted off that 361 platform, went on to the 383 and the 440 and the 426 Hemis as options in 1967, but a 66 440 wasn't available in a Charger. Now, this is what's interesting.
But you can't. Can you tell between a 383 and a 440?
Yeah,
because it's the same big block.
Yeah,
right?
same
but
architecture. But the stamp pad on a 440 is right up top, and for a 383, it's right under the distributor. So right there, down here on the side. So if you're looking,
so there's a
down at the
definitive
engine.
block casting feature.
Yes.
But other than that, if you don't know to look for it, they would kind of look identical, maybe.
Right. Because what's the key is telling the big blocks from the small blocks for Mopar is where the distributor is located. If it's in the back, it's a small block. If it's in the front, it's a big block. When you look at the 383 and the 440 and the 400, the distributor's up front. So just by popping the hood, you could get those engines mixed up fairly easy.
So taking a 66 that came with 318, but it was offered with a 383 to drop that 440 in there would be
it's easy.
Really slick and smart.
Yeah,
right.
There's no sacrilege there.
Necessarily, yeah. there's no
You won't get any gripes on that.
vintage kind of
Matter of fact,
error going
my
on,
66 has a 440 in it, so it's a common thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've had a lot of cool cars on the show lately. One in particular we're talking about right now, 66 Dodge Charger, designed by a guy named Carl Cam Cameron. What a lot of people don't know about the 66 Dodge Charger, it had 4 bucket seats and a column, sort of a console that went all the way through the entire car. So you had 4 specific like bucket seats, kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then in the back you had 2 little thumbnail things, and you would take them, plop, and it would flop the whole back, barrier between the trunk and the back seat. It would flop it down. The reason that was designed is because Carl Cam Cameron was a big fan of pop culture and surfing. Surfing was huge in the mid to late 60s. It was a big California crave. Everybody was trying to figure out how to incorporate surfing into their advertising or their market, demographic. And one of the ways that Charger was marketed was the ability you could get a big old long 9-foot surfboard inside the car.
Could you really get a surfboard in there? Like, I get the fact that the seat comes down, but surfboards are typically, right, at least body height. So call it 6 foot something longboards.
Not only a 6 foot
8, 9.
one, you can get the 9-foot board in the Dodge Charger.
Do you have to get it sideways up between the front captain chairs?
No, because both the seats lay down, right? And you could put a whole 9-foot surfboard inside of a 66 Dodge Charger.
Well, some of the old like Impalas, they were big boats, Galaxy 500s, but the 66 kind of feels somewhere in the middle. But maybe it's bigger than I'm thinking.
Well, it is the ability to open up all the compartments the entire length of the car. And most cars didn't give you that option.
Yeah, no.
Now, something else, people, when they see 66 Chargers, that's one of the things that stick out. The interior was well beyond its years and era. It was just really cool for that era to have 4 individually sort of designed into the garnish moldings of the car. Just this cool seat and a console for everybody. Even the people in the back seat that had little compartments. Really ahead of his time, something unique about that car. Now, this one we had on the show was unique because he wanted a 440. Like we mentioned a second ago, it's pretty common for people to upgrade and get the big block. This 440 has always been, for Mopar, for Dodge enthusiasts, it was the equivalent of the 454 for Chevrolets or the 460 for Fords. Yeah. It was their big block. Now, some people will tell you the 426 Hemi, a.k.a. the Elephant, known as the greatest drag racing motor of all time. And a lot of people will tell you it is by far the greatest motor of all time and stand to the death on that hill. I will tell you, a lot of racers for Dodge found that 440 wedge motor would make just as much power as that 426 Hemi would with the right combination. And they had a lot of great success in the years of NASCAR with that 446 pack. It was just as lethal. I think it may have won more races than the 426 Hemi in 70. So it was a lethal combination, big power, still big cubic inches for that time frame. But there are certain blocks that make those 440 years significantly better. There's some even the earlier years. There's a lot of myths out there. And you're probably a good person to ask, why are there so many myths about, well, I guess it would be manufactured, because you do hear stories of Chevrolet lessening the thickness of certain walls in their casting.
Yep.
But Mopar wasn't, as it got older and the gas crunch of the 70s happened, Mopar never took any weight out of their blocks or castings. But is that some of the reasoning you hear about thin wall blocks or this, that, the other? Or what was the deal? Why did people get a little bit afraid of some of those offerings from the mid 70s?
Well, you have a lot of stuff moving around on a big casting like that. So some things move around for exactly the reasons you mentioned. Right? You're getting into smog eras, you're getting into weight savings, lots of lost power, right? Through the late 70s and 80s. So why do I got to carry around all this structure around? So let me save some material, let me save some mass. So they'll whittle away at things, right? Well, it hasn't broken. We don't have the tools, the analytical tools that we have today to almost kind of X-ray vision where the stresses are. But, well, I haven't broken here, so let's take some material away. And then sometimes just you have variability in castings, right? So you've got all these sand cores. They all kind of lock together in a big puzzle, and you pour hot metal in there, blazing hot metal in there. Well, cores tend to float, right? They're floating around the binder that holds the sand together. It's just glue. It breaks down with heat. So it's starting to get soggy and saggy. So, then you get into these thinner wall conditions, like ununiform cylinder walls, so you can't punch this block more than 40 over without getting too thin on the jacket. And
Right.
so, yeah, a lot of different reasons why over the eras. And even your tools. Your tools get worn down over time from blowing mold after mold after mold. And so all of a sudden your dimensions kind of shift. So you get these.
A lot more core shift. I imagine those later years when that tooling, dialing is dying sets are worn out and a lot more, bigger tolerances and clearances than what were probably originally designed in that.
You can get thin sections of iron after you machine it, or even how you pick up the casting, right? A casting is this big rough shape and you have to grab it and start punching holes in it somewhere. Well, you could be off in your machining, so all your cylinders are shifted to the left or to the right, right? So, think about it.
I know
all
over the years,
20, 30 years of blocks and cylinder heads, and you're going to have probably eras of lightweighting and fixing and, tool wear out, and who knows? So then you get, some that fail, some that don't fail, and they become legendary, right? Oh, this one won certain race, or so-and-so uses this one all the time,
Yeah, it's wild. Through some of the early castings of the 440s, core shift was a big thing on the camshaft. You'll see, imagine you got two holes. If you look at the core shift on where the camshaft was punched out at, you'll see it, a lot of times it's supposed to be perfectly round. Like imagine a quarter with a dime in the middle of it, and you'll see where that core has shifted and moved, and the camshaft the dime is down here where the date is, or instead of being in the middle, or the dime is up here where George, Washington's face is, or something over here. It's so offset. You could tell that just visually looking at it. Something I pointed out in the show is something that if you're a big Dodge fan, if you know anything about casting number, Dodge is pretty cool. They put the month, year, and everything, and the size of the engine right there on the casting number. So you can say, hey, this thing was built in, June of 1968, and it's a 440 stamped right there on the side.
That's handy.
What you're also looking for in that casting number is the number. There's a lot of different offerings from, various models, makes, and so forth over the years. What a lot of people don't realize, we mentioned this briefly a second ago, throughout the years and the emissions, what Kevin was mentioning about, you'll weigh a 350 block, and a 350 block from 1970 will weigh significantly more than a 350 block from 1979. They actually decreased some of the metal they were putting in it. But for Dodge, weight loss is never on Dodge's mind. Even today in modern cars. Look at the Challengers and Chargers. Drive those compared to Camaros and Mustangs, and you're going to find a much heavier and sort of mushier car. But in a straight line, who cares, man? It's going fast. But it is true. With Dodges, if you look at some of their older 70 blocks, they'll weigh more than their 68, 69, 70 HP blocks that you hear a lot about. And no difference in the casting of an older HP block than what you're going to have in a later model, say a 75 to 78 block. Matter of fact, you actually will see some extra ribs cast into it that actually makes it a little bit stronger in some of those later 70 model blocks than he did on even the HP blocks. HP for Dodge was simply a stamp model. It wasn't anything to do with the material used. It was just a stamp saying they put these internals in with this compression and so forth. No architecture difference between those blocks and the standard C-body block that was going out in a 70 Chrysler New Yorker.
Well, another thing that makes it a little tricky, right? We talk about, how much material is there, maybe some ribs and stuff, the things that you could see, but they can also change the alloy of the cast iron. They can put low-grade cast iron in there, right? They can upgrade A3, A6, whatever, and then they can go to truck iron, so truck iron, they call it just a nickname, but it's got better alloys. It makes it stronger, right? You go all the way to nodular iron, which you wouldn't do for a block, but for a 9-inch or whatever, right? Nodular iron. Or you get something in the middle, right? You can get that whole compacted graphite type iron. So, a lot of different alloys, as well as, how much material is there. Is it even in the right place? And you get a lot of that just from history, These ones just always crap out the bottom, the mains are broken here, or this one cracks this, location over there.
One thing we got to show compared to, say, a big block Chevrolet is on those big block 440s. When you pull the oil pan off, I was hoping you would catch it. Kevin picked it up right away. I'm like, what's different about this? And I pulled the oil pan off, and he's like, poof, no big crankshaft hanging out in the middle of space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the crankshaft is way down in the block. So all that material, all that supporting cast is all included in the block and it's spinning right there. So you don't have all that centrifugal force way out here working against the leverage, right? So it's beneficial in that regard for spinning bigger RPMs. But for this particular casting, if you're a Dodge fan and you're out there shopping for blocks, don't be afraid to look at the old RVs, the old C-bodies, the old trucks, because what you're going to find, if you're fortunate enough, is what we had on the show. This guy had just gone out and got a block. He didn't realize he had the Holy Grail, but we showed why it was that on the show. There's a lot more support. There's a lot more. There's basically a saddle that the bearings ride in for a Dodge, and the saddle is significantly thicker in the 6603 casted blocks than a lot of the earlier blocks from the 60s and 70s. So if you're out there looking for a block, look for that casting number. Look at the last 4 digits on it. It's like 4, maybe like a 440 to represent 440, but it's 6603. That's the casting number you want to look at. That will have a 3-inch supporting cast, like forward cast right there, and the saddle that the bearing rides in will be about 40% thicker. So on a regular standard 440 block, you're looking at 1.9 to 2 inches of material. On those 6603 blocks, it's over 3 inches. And then the saddle that bearing's riding in, you're looking at 40% more material. So thinking power adders, turbos, superchargers, nitrous, that is by far the block you're going to look for to last you the longest when you're really hammering big power and big numbers at it.
Yeah, and that bulkhead is a really critical area on the block. I mean, if you think about the structure on a block, it's connecting a bunch of stuff. It's holding water in the water jackets, and you've got oil drillings. So it's got lots of different material and features to do different things. But the structure, right? You've got a cylinder head sitting on top with these round cylinders, right? Now you got these explosions in there. So what's holding on the cylinder? Those cylinder bolts. So those cylinder bolts, where's that load going? Right down to the crank. So that pathway from the bolt bosses on the cylinder head down to the crank. And then what's the crank trying to do? Blow right out the bottom.
Blow right out,
right?
Yeah.
So those caps, those bolts going up into that bulkhead. So that bulkhead for each bay, right, where the pistons and rods are flinging around, each one of those bulkheads is essentially the load path from the heads blowing out and the crank blowing down. So think about all the stresses on those threads.
Some more material, man.
Yeah, putting material in the right flow path. You can put it over here in left field and over there in right field, but it ain't doing a whole lot. But getting it in the right places, right, is key to longevity for sure.
Yeah. And every one of my big racing engines are those same 6603 casted blocks. I always seek those out. They're big in RVs. Mopar had a lot of stuff in RVs back in the day, big in trucks. But if you can find those, man, you got a lot more material to play with. That means you could always turn up big power adders and don't have to sweat it as much.
Every OE has that special, right? I remember double X rods, or pink rods, or, and there's truck blocks with truck iron and different eras, and Fords had different thinning out of the bulkheads that, don't get into these 80s blocks or whatever. And then that's where, man, if you can find a good one that's not been punched out too much, it's got a little bit of meat left, man, you can create a great score. Otherwise, you're going aftermarket, which fixes all those things, right? Takes all that historical and puts the metal where it's supposed to be.
You're paying hard for them fixes.
But you're
paying hard for those fixes.
You are. Yep. So when you can find just that right piece of history, that had the right goodies in it for what you're doing, that's a big score. Yeah, man,
because look, you can get a 440, get that 6603 block. Nowadays, you can get a rotating assembly, the good ones for 500 cubic inch, big block out of that. Fairly inexpensive. You're talking to $2,000 to $3,000 range for the good stuff, right? You get some heads, which, are available now at several places. And all of a sudden, man, you got a 500, cubic inch engine putting down, 630 at the rear tire. So it's a worthy combination on a big old school NA motor. Put some fuel injection system, and you got your righteous resto mod. So that's a lethal combination available for them big blocks.
Yeah.
Kind of a wild car in its own right. Something that, for the most part was just kicked to the curb for $500. I threw so many of those Chargers away for $500.
You don't see very many of them, right?
No, and I really believe that's because so many people it was such an ugly car. To be honest, it was the 77 Mustang, bro. It was the 78 Mustang. It was whatever that is. The first 2 years of the Dodge Charger for so many Charger fans, it was, not the prettiest of cars, but a little bit of work, a little bit of moving the fenders around, some roof styling, and a little bit of labor. Those cars, for whatever reason, they made a big comeback recently. And what's really cool is seeing people's variety of what they want to do with them and what they bought them for and how they want to use them. It's just wild seeing the price of them really go through the roof, man. Because again, I've seen them for so many decades just be thrown away for $500.
Yeah, what is your thought on that? Right, so like the Ferrari Dino, for anybody not a Ferrari fan, it's a 6-cylinder car. Right, it doesn't quite fit in the V12, like full on Ferrari lineage, and it was overlooked, just like the '66 Charger, for a long decades and decades and decades. Well, anybody that wants to buy a Ferrari, they're in the multi-millions, and the prices are so out of reach. They're like, wow, I could own a Ferrari if I got a Dino. And so all of a sudden you got a bunch of people buying Dinos, and it's not like they're going up into the multi-millions as the V12 ones are, but I mean, from a car that was overlooked, all of a sudden they've skyrocketed, in the last 5-10 years.
I feel like, honest to God, that this first gen Charger is riding the coattails of the second gen's popularity and out of range pricing that has occurred with those cars. Most people will tell you finding a shell of a second gen Charger, 68 through 70, you're looking at 10 to 20 grand for a rusted out shell nowadays. Yeah. So the price of those cars has driven the demand and what people are getting for them so far out of most people's range. All of a sudden, these start looking a lot better. It's a Charger. It's something a little different. A lot of people have done wide body second gen Chargers. That's the reason I didn't do one. Everybody had already done it, right? Nobody had done a wide body first gen Charger. So, you know what? I think there's something to that. You still get the Charger bravado, but you get something a little different that you're bringing to the table that everybody else hasn't already done. So it's almost like you're riding coattails, but you're creating another wave with a different application of it.
Yeah, I certainly can't see it cresting up anywhere near where the 68s are. But from being, let's say, worthless to worth something, I could see it, right? I mean, to be in the
clown hammered.
Well, to be in the club, right? Because you got your first gen Camaros, right? You got your Chargers and Cudas, and those are the tier 1 favorites. And then those prices, like you said, on all of those have just got skyrocketed. So now you're getting to get your tier 2. So somewhere in there, tier 2-ish, 3-ish is probably that Charger. Yeah. Right. Never be a tier 1, but it's coming off the bottom floor.
Yeah, it's finally getting some accomplishment, some acknowledgement, and some eyes and people focused on the car. Yeah. And this guy was super happy about it. Put a 440 in it. Well, he wants a manual, which is a great way to go. And he's putting a little bit of power to it. So I feel excited. I think this is a good muscle car resto mod that people can still do with a decent budget.
Yeah, well, that's what I was exactly going to say. Because when you throw that 440 in there, right, with the manual, which we like, but you throw the 440 in there and hopefully put some decent shoes on it, get a decent stance on it, and all of a sudden, hey man, it ain't the coolest cat out there, but bang for buck, man, you got a ripping big block, making a good couple hundred horsepower and a lot of torque, just ripping around having fun. Yeah, I'm all about it. So 2 thumbs up.
And really for a good price. We had an 833 overdrive, you guys. Now look, I'm a big fan of Mopar, but when you see a 4-speed overdrive 833, you got something rare. And it was funny because sometimes we'll look at videos on how to do things. When you're breaking apart an 833, I've only seen the inside of those from one of my friends. I got a transmission guy. We all probably had transmission buddies. I tend to stay away from transmissions just because, dude, you want to see something confusing, bust the guts of a transmission open on a 727 and try stacking it back together. I've done it a couple times with people watching over my shoulders, and that to me is fun. But it's still a thing you got to do on a daily to get the confidence down to build one right. Well, I got a buddy, and thank God for him, because honestly, God, we take the side case off of this 833 4-speed, we were told it was an overdrive transmission, and you hear a little bit, whispers of the famous 833 overdrive transmission. Well, I'd never seen one. And when I popped the side cover off, all the videos that we'd seen on how to get the entire gear mechanism out was just pull the front plate off and roll the whole thing out.
Yeah, roll the shish kebab of gears and synchros.
Yeah.
And,
the synchros pop out this way, move the reverse over, and the whole planetary gear set, all these, just big cog teeth wheels will come out with it, not a problem. And on the videos that we watched, it looked so easy, they just touched it, and it comes apart. We pull the side cover off, move the things according to that, and I'm like, boom, pulling on it, and there's a big gear sitting right here, and all these other gears and synchros are running into it. And I'm
how
like,
are we going to get around that big gear?
Exactly. I'm like, I'm not sure how to get around this one because that's not something I've seen before. So thankful I've got a buddy. If you're a Dodge fan, you probably know, you can Google Superstock. Superstock is a 69 Roadrunner. And one of the guys, it was for a while, it was the most documented car of all time. It ran 4 or 5 decades of being documented from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into the 2000s. And it was just a green 69 Roadrunner that was a test mule, and it was nicknamed Superstock. Well, my buddy here in Colorado, a guy named Louis Carboni, used to be the head mechanic and drove that car for a few years. So imagine the Mopar blood pumping through this man's veins. I call him on a FaceTime call, and I show him the inside of the side cover of this 833. And he looks at it. As soon as he looks at it, he goes, "That's one of them damn overdrive transmissions."
Boy, you got an overdrive
Oh,
there.
man. Yeah, you got overdrive there. And I'm like, what? So, yeah, even he was a little bit stunned. He's like, oh, yeah, that's a tough one there. That's ugly. That's going to get ugly. Here's what you got to do. So with a little help of a new CNC table that we got, this really cool plasma table, and a little helper in a bat, we made a tool. We popped the bearing off. Some good ARP bolt usage welded together. Like it's one of those fun times for fabbing up
ARP
tools.
bolts together, but
Yeah.
to make this tool, let's just say it worked. Got us out of a jam.
It was fun.
Yeah.
And pulled a bearing, we're able to tear it apart. And we think imagine a 440 with a stroker kit, so 500 cubic inches, with a little bit of cam and a decent head package. That makes 550, 600 all day.
Oh, dude, that's gonna wake that car up big time. Because we drove with 318, and it's just a wheezy little thing, and you put a little work into it, I think, but it just had no fun factor, right? You might as well just be driving around and record,
Yeah, but we can roll at 30, mat the throttle, and it just annihilate your rear tires.
Yeah,
that's doing something. That's what these engines do. So I think he's going to be in for an awesome little setup. And we build it really going deep with it, with all the stuff. And I think it maybe even be back in the show. But here's a car that you can get for, like we were mentioning, for a fairly decent price. You can still pick these up for, ballpark between $10,000 and $20,000, which is not a big commitment for a car nowadays. Think any car you're going to go out and buy, you're going to spend $30,000, $40,000 in. But if you took that and just applied it towards an old car, I think he had a good idea. The patina was good enough he didn't mind driving around with it a little beat up and paint a little dull, chipped in a couple places. But his 440 is putting a little bit of money in. Want to get fuel injection, had a 4-speed with an overdrive, had a decent rear end with a decent gear in it, going to do suspension and brakes. All of a sudden, you got a car that's to and from. It's garnishing you a lot of cool points because it's not like everything else on the road.
What is that?
And
yeah,
it's a Charger. Yeah, and if you do an AC and do it right, he'd done the gauges and stuff, you got you a pretty righteous ride for the same cost. You'd be driving around a car that everybody else is in.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, we got to come back to that 440, this runner, right? This runner that he was tempted to just put in, but our whole adventure on the show was kind of sorting through it, right? Going down, tearing it apart, looking at these parts, and doing a little bit of, Sherlock Holmes, right? What do we got here? What is good? What is bad?
First warning signs an engine is not a runner is when you see overspray on
everything.
Push rods
on
and internals.
Yeah. It's orange. It looks brand new.
On the valley pan.
It looks brand new, but you pull off a few parts, you pull off a valve cover, and there's orange spray paint. not just on the head, but on
Everywhere.
the top of the push rods, and partly on the rocker arms, in the ports of the cylinder heads, and it just
Not
been
good.
sprayed
Not good.
at the last minute, right?
Yep. That's always one of the telltale signs, because if you're an engine person and you're getting a build, an engine that somebody's put together, it's not going to be like that. It's not going to have overspray on the push rods. It's just going to be better taken care of. So that should be a telltale sign. Second thing you should look for.
What's that? Go ahead.
I think second thing you should look for is the fasteners all over the engine. So that's a good indicator, because if you're going to go through an engine, chances are you're going to upgrade a lot of the fasteners. Look for upgraded fasteners, because we on the show always go to ARP. I feel like a lot of people, that's just the go-to. But if you're dealing with something that's older, that has been rebuilt, you're going to be able to tell with the fasteners, the use on them, how wore they are, and whether or not they look from the factory or not.
Yeah, now this one was a little sneaky, because before we get to the main thing, we won't talk about the main thing yet. That just really went
Yeah.
Well, when you pull the intake off and you look at the cylinder heads, you're like, this cylinder head looks fresh, right? The cylinder heads were very fresh, so fresh indeed that when we zipped all the bolts off and went to pull the heads off, I mean, they just lifted right off. Not a bit of
there was no stickum at
on
all.
that head gasket. Like, it had never been fired. And you're like, oh, this is...
Which is a sign it's never gone through a heat treatment.
It's never been fired,
Right?
which is a good
heat
sign in a
cycled
way, right? And you flip the
Yeah.
head over and you're like, not a single burn on the combustion chamber. Like, this sucker is a brand new rebuilt head, right? It's not some junker.
Yes.
Like, okay, maybe you got a winner here. But
However, the head had been decked, so it was flat and flush. That's always a good sign.
Yeah.
However, we pulled a valley pan, and it reveals the camshaft. And the camshaft, the lobes were rusted. And I mean rusted,
busted
pitted,
and rusted.
Huge rust.
Super
in it.
worn down.
And
So definitely not a new cam, right? Not a rework, not anything, just a worn down cam, probably through the heat treat, right? Got into some of that harder stuff, and then just pitted rust all through the sweep. The rocker or the lash adjusters are sweeping
Lifters.
across.
Yeah. So there was no doubt that cam would have just chewed itself apart after,
Hundreds of miles.
100
that have
miles,
been
if not
toast.
sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would have grenaded.
So that was the first sign that the top end might have been fresh, but the bottom end had some miles on it. So we had to keep on
Then
digging.
we flipped it over, started popping off, main caps and bearings, and they revealed to us that it had some wear on it. But I think it was a true 440, but it was from that smog era year, in the 75 through 78 era. The pistons were so far down in the cylinders, it could have been 8-to-1 compression. Like, it was terrible in the compression.
It was
That's
a flat
something you would
top,
have to
but
address.
recessed.
Oh, it was a flat top.
Recessed. Yeah.
They're down in the hole a quarter of an inch, if not further.
Yeah. And then we pulled them out. We could see the bearings and all the wear. It was original stuff, like the original giant, clunky, heavy, old school, massive pistons, short rods, really inefficient.
Yeah. Massive, big old long skirts. The piston was like this long, tall, compared to today's LS stuff, which is going to be like this. Just a lot of old stuff, and a lot of weight working against you, a lot of inefficient stuff, a lot of low compression stuff, all of which you want to get rid of for this type.
And
build,
honestly,
this
though,
type
on a budget, if he really wants to, he could probably throw cam and lifters in there, and he might be able to get that thing to fire and run for a long time, right? Because we don't put a ton of miles on our stuff. It just would have been low compression, right? Just super
it'd been that
wheezy,
low,
tired.
high 200, low 300 horsepower,
Exactly.
440. Now, with a rotate assembly on a $3,000 investment, you're able to get 500 cubic inches, and all of a sudden that thing becomes a dynamo out on the street, sounds the part as well, backs it up with burnouts, and all the cool points you can stack in the back of that thing. Remember, it holds a surfboard, so cool points galore.
All right. Quick one, though, before we go, Willie. What would be your favorite
Go.
pick for cylinder heads on a 440? What are your favorite
So,
ones out
check
there?
this out.
Who's making really good heads, pulling a lot of power?
I believe Indy makes a good head. However, Callie's Callie's has been really turning a corner for some Mopar Dodge enthusiasts. Callie's is coming out with a wedge head that is going to be a game changer.
Callie's is in
High
the
port
crank
head.
and rod guys, Callie's?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Callie's is stepping
Well, I
up
know they're
big
into
time for
cams
Dodge.
now. I mean, that's big, but I didn't know they were doing heads for those.
Yeah. Yeah. Watch, man. They're coming out with it. I think they were supposed to come out with it this early, like, if not the last couple months, in by the end of May, beginning of June. It's supposed to be released this spring. And it is supposed to be a dynamo head, raised port, all the big, big air numbers that we want. So I look for that, but Indy's always a good go-to.
All right, so good Indy head, good
The 440-1.
good stroker bottom end. What are you thinking, like 10.5 to 1? What can you pull off in those?
Yeah, 10.5. So if you run aluminum head, man, you could run, I'm not opposed to running a little bit in 11.2. If you got decent premium gas, an aluminum head, you're all right with that. It won't knock. So I try to get my compression up there. I got to, depending on what I'm building it for. If I'm building a nitrous motor, I don't mind running it down there because obviously I'm going to be hitting it with a lot of nitrous. So I want that compression just a little bit lower. But then you don't have as fun just being NA running
you're
around
at high
the street.
altitude though, so your air is a little bit thinner.
Yeah.
So probably you can cheat the CR up a little bit, way up high there.
Sure.
And then usually a good marriage is a big lumpy cam with a little bit too much compression, because you're not trapping the air. You know how you're not making big power down low, right? With a big cam, so you can get away where you're normally knock limited, because you're not really trapping all the air. So big cam and too much compression kind of are friends,
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's funny. I just turned the timing down a little bit on my big nasty. I got a 542 big black. I run my 69. I'll get ready to do a cruise for a 6-year-old with cancer, and I just took some timing out of it. But I dropped it about 6 degrees, pulled a little spark out of it, and then I changed up the fuel ratio a little bit, and then I raised the torsion bars on it all to get ready for a street cruise. So I put the street jets in it for my nitrous, knocked some timing out of it, raised the torsion bars so I won't be smacking the oil pan. But still, on a 150 shot, it makes big numbers. The car makes 800 on a 150 shot.
All
so
right.
it's a fun ride.
So what do you
for a
think this
cruiser.
guy, without going crazy, what do you think is a good number? 550?
I think it goes between 500 and 600 really easy with that combination.
Yeah. I think that'd be a hot old ticket in that.
And it's through a manual, so it's gonna be righteous. So fun stuff, man.
For sure,
fun stuff.
for sure.
Recommend you get one too.
Yeah, well, hey, if any of that sounded fun and interesting, check out our show for sure, because we had a lot more fun. You can check out all the things that we talked about and more.
Yeah, and actually learn a tip or two when we're diving into that 440 and that 833. Really cool stuff that you can apply across the board. So check out our show every weekends on the Motor Trend Network. Also available on Discovery Plus and Max. Thanks to our producer, Scoop, our senior producer, Justin the Man Carter, executive producer, Bob Ecker. He is Kevin Bird. I'm Willie B for the Two Guys Garage podcast.
And don't forget to check out our website, twoguysgarage.com. Check us out on social everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Two Guys Garage. And the Two Guys Garage podcast, it's a copyright 2024, Brenton Productions Incorporated, all rights reserved.
Hey, man, let me show you real fast before you go. Normal 66 Charger roofline. Like here. This one, way down here. Look how low. See? Woo, sweet. All right, just a little play. If you ever get to see the car, check it out. You'll like it. All right.
Yeah, your wide body fastback 66 is pretty dope, and it doesn't look hardly anything like an original anymore, and that's probably why it looks so awesome. So big kudos, big thumbs up.
Thanks, my man.
All right, guys, hope you enjoyed it. We'll
See you,
catch you on the next Two Guys Garage podcast.